my colleague Jen Atwood, who is helpfully getting us recording this session, so it'll be available afterwards, and my colleague Latoya Bosworth. We're also very grateful to have Amy Cohn and Brenna from Partners Interpreting, who are helping make this webinar ASL accessible. Our contact information is there, so please feel free, to reach out to us as well with your questions after this webinar. If you're not familiar with Mass Humanities, we create opportunities for the people of Massachusetts to transform their lives and build a more equitable Commonwealth through the humanities. We do this through grants, which is what we're going to talk about today, programs and partnerships with nonprofits around Massachusetts. Our work is made possible by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Mass Cultural Council, and the generosity of our donors. Our Expand Massachusetts Stories initiative, which we are going to talk about today, is made possible with support from the Barr Foundation. So here's an agenda for our time today. We are going to do a big picture look at our grants program, and then we're each going to talk about the different grant opportunities that we have available in 2023. So we'll give you an overview of each grant. We'll talk about the eligibility requirements for those grants. And we'll also give you ways to learn more. We could not cover all of the material in this webinar today, but there's lots of ways to learn more, to reach out to us, and to find that information. Then we'll talk a little bit about how to get started in the application system, which is an online application system. So we'll give you a preview of what it looks like to get started in there. And then, as I've said, we'll have question and answer at the end of our session. So here is the big picture look at our grants program in 2023. As you can see, we have the Expand Massachusetts Stories grants, and there are 2 tracks for that, 2 processes for that. I'll be speaking about those. We also have the Reading Frederick Douglass Together program. My colleague Toya Bosworth will be speaking to that grant and that program. And finally, yesterday we announced the recovery grants. My colleague Jen Atwood will be presenting on those. Full guidelines for those grants will be available March 6th, but we wanted to make sure that all of you had the information about them here today, and that we're able to give you a sense of what that grant opportunity is and what the basic eligibility requirements for it are. I also wanted to mention that Bridge Street sponsorships are not going to be offered in 2023. This was a grant opportunity that we've had for the past 2 years, and we're not offering it this year. All right, well, now I'm happy to talk about the Expand Massachusetts Stories grant line. Expand Massachusetts Stories grants are grants that support projects that collect, interpret, and share narratives about the Commonwealth, with an emphasis on the voices and experiences that have gone unrecognized or have been excluded from public conversation. These grants can support a wide variety of project types, so lots of different kinds of work. They can support oral histories, community-based exhibits, new interpretations of collections, so taking something that we think we know well and looking at it from a new perspective. Short documentary film, those are films that can be completed in the grant period, typically 12 to 16 months, and then ready for conversations in communities about the subjects of the film. Lots of kinds of facilitated discussion, and a lot of different project types and combinations of these types that I couldn't possibly cover in a webinar like this today. If you want to learn more about the kinds of work that we funded, we have a link here, and I think we're going to drop it into the chat, where you can see the work that we funded last year through the Expand Massachusetts Stories grants. And we also have a much larger past grants database that you are welcome to browse. All of that is available on our website. You can see on this slide an image from a 2021 Expand Massachusetts Stories grantee. And this project was called Somos Latinos, A Journey to Lawrence and Beyond. It was a grant awarded to the Friends of the Lawrence Heritage State Park. And what you see is a community conversation where members of the Latino community from Lawrence came together and shared objects that spoke to their experience, either coming to Lawrence or being born in Lawrence, growing up in Lawrence. And members of this team are now part of a content team creating a community exhibit for the Heritage State Park there. So that's just one example of what a project can look like. There are things that we do not fund for the Expand Massachusetts Stories grant line, so I want to touch on a couple of those today. There's more information in our grant guidelines you can access on our website, but these are some that I wanted to highlight. We can't fund lobbying or advocacy projects. We can't fund specifically the creation of art or artistic performances. That includes creative writing and creative nonfiction, but there's a lot of things that we can fund that might, be engaged in the arts later on in a project that really has a community story sharing basis that sort of prefigures the artistic creation or engages with the artistic creation after it's complete. I'm happy to talk more about that and answer questions, particularly over email and in future webinars. We don't fund direct social service, so that would be things like direct therapy, social service, legal counseling, those kinds of things. We don't fund profit making or fundraising projects. We don't fund capital improvements or restoration. So that's the big view of the Expand Massachusetts Stories grants. And now I'm going to talk about the two tracks for the grant, the two processes through which you might apply. So we have the Advancing Equity track, and the first stage in that, which is a letter of inquiry, an LOI, is due March 20th. So that's about a month from now. And then we have what's called the Open track, and that has a slightly later deadline. It is an application only, so you won't be completing a letter of inquiry, and that would be due May 22nd. Since the deadline for the Advancing Equity track is coming up first, I'm going to start by talking about that. Here's a snapshot of that Advancing Equity track. So this is the basic information about the track. We can give grants of up to $20,000 for these projects. There is no matching requirement for those grants, meaning that that $20,000 can potentially be the full project budget. We always recommend that you have additional sources, whether it's volunteer time or other grants or other cash resources for a project, but there's no specific requirement for this grant in terms of matching. As I've said, those letters of inquiry are due March 20th. And the process for filling one out, right, the place where you can access and answer those questions is open now. So when my colleague Jen shows you how to access those, you will be able to complete a letter of inquiry in our online form. From those letters of inquiry, we will select 15 projects to participate and complete full applications with Mass Humanities support. I won't go into detail about the full applications because that will be part of the process for those 15 projects selected. But for all of you today who might be considering applying for the Advancing Equity track, I wanted to speak a little bit to what that letter of inquiry looks like. So it is 4 short narrative questions about your project, one about how it expands Massachusetts stories, one about what you're planning to do, another about who your team will be, and then another about what you think your budget might be. All of your answers can be updated if you're selected into the track and you work on the application process with us. So they're provisional, but we want to get a sense of what you're thinking of doing. In the letter of inquiry, you will also answer demographic questions about your project team and some eligibility questions about your organization. Let me say more about what the Advancing Equity track is. So it is an opportunity for applicants whose projects are led by people from historically excluded communities and whose organizations meet additional criteria. So based on a review of those letters of inquiry, a committee will select up to 15 proposals to develop final applications through a non-competitive process that includes cohort workshops and application development support with Mass Humanities staff and additional advisors. So when we say non-competitive, what we mean is that the 15 proposals, the 15 letters of inquiry, we're able to select into the process, will complete full applications with us and will not be competing with each other for funding. As I'll say in the next slide, we will be pre-committing to supporting those projects who can complete a full application with us. I want to give you a little bit of background on why we have a process like this. Projects that surface and share people's stories, especially stories of historically excluded communities, we know they take time and they take care to prepare. And for small organizations and for projects led by people from under-resourced communities, the time it takes to prepare a full project application is a significant investment. So we recognize that you are investing time in an application process with us. And so through the track, we will honor that investment in time that you make with us with application support and a commitment to fund those projects that meet our grant criteria. And our intention is to make sure that, that you can meet those criteria and that we can fund those projects for those that are selected into the track. What kind of projects are eligible for the Advancing Equity track? So projects need to have leadership roles for people of color or other communities historically excluded from humanities leadership. And the organization that's applying needs to meet 2 of 4 criteria. The organization, those criteria can be having an operating budget of under $300,000, or having 2 or fewer full-time staff, having never received a grant from Mass Humanities, or being an organization that is based in and primarily supports communities of color. So any 2 out of those 4, 4 out of 4, also fine, 3 out of 4, also fine, or 2 out of 4. Zooming out a little bit, what kinds of applicants are eligible in general? So applicants must be a nonprofit or a government organization or a state or federally recognized tribe that serves Massachusetts residents. Fiscally sponsored projects are also welcome, but Mass Humanities does not award funding to individuals. Applicants also need to have completed any past Mass Humanities grant projects and submitted their final reports 1 week before their final application is due. There are 3 exceptions to this rule. Organizations can have open 2023 Reading Frederick Douglass Together grants, which my colleague Toya will be talking about. Organizations can be fiscal sponsors on more than 1 Mass Humanities grant at a time. And colleges and universities can have more than 1 grant open at a time if those grants are for different departments or institutes. So now that you have a sense of what the track is, I want to give you some of the key dates. As I've said, those letters of inquiry are due March 20th. So that's the most important deadline that is coming up. If you want to be considered for the Advancing Equity track, you need to complete and submit that letter of inquiry by March 20th. By April 21st, we'll be notifying folks who've submitted a letter of inquiry whether they are selected for the track. For those that are selected, we'll be doing that application work and workshopping the week of May 8th. And those final applications will be due June 5th through July 10th. A little bit of flexibility in there for the 15 who are selected. And we'll be giving awards within 3 weeks of those submission deadlines. If you want to learn more, if we're not able to answer all of your questions today, and if you just want to preview your project with us and get a little bit of feedback, you can book a 45-minute appointment with myself or my fellow program officers via Calendly. And so we'll have a 45-minute Zoom or phone conversation, or shorter if you prefer that. If a Zoom or a phone call isn't the best for you, if those times aren't available, or if it's not accessible to you, please also consider emailing your questions to grants@masshumanities.org. And of course, you can access guidelines, a preview of the application, the letter of inquiry on our website. One final note about the Advancing Equity track. If your project is not selected for the Advancing Equity track, or if it's not eligible for the track specifically, please still consider applying for an Expand Massachusetts Stories grant via the open track, which is what I'm going to explain next. We recognize that there will be projects that advance equity and expand Massachusetts stories that are not selected for the track. Right? We only have about 15 spaces that we can select for. And of course, there will be projects that advance equity and expand our stories that don't meet those specific criteria. So that is why we have the open track, which is what I'm going to explain next. But I realize that I've been saying a whole lot of things, probably fairly quickly. So maybe I'll just take a 10-second break while we look at these images from another Expand Massachusetts Stories grantee of the National Black Doll Museum. So I'm just going to give myself a 10-second count, and if you all want to do a breathing in and breathing out with me while we do that, and then we'll move on to the open track. Okay, I feel ready. I hope you all are. All right. So the open track is the same goals as the equity track. These are projects that support the collection, interpretation, and sharing of narratives about the Commonwealth, emphasizing the voices and experiences that have gone unrecognized or been excluded from public conversation. The same kinds of range of projects that we can fund, and same range of work that we can't fund. The differences are in the timing and the process and some of the requirements. So we can award the same amount, up to $20,000. For the open track, there is a matching requirement. The amount that you request of Mass Humanities, your project needs to be able to bring at least that same amount to the project from additional sources. Most of that can be volunteer time and services, but 10% of that needs to be something that you and your organization are paying for, what we call a cash match. The process, the application itself will open on March 20th, 2023. And on April 24th, the week of April 24th, I'll be hosting another series of webinars that walks through that application process in detail, answers questions about matching, questions about how to answer the required questions on the application. One thing you'll notice here is that there is not a letter of inquiry for the open track. So I was mentioning in a moment just how you can get some feedback on your project before considering applying. Those applications will be due May 22nd, 2023. And it's not on the slide, but I will say that the award notifications will be in September of 2023. The requirements for the application are about 1,000 to 2,500 words and answering some questions about your project. You'll be completing an Excel budget sheet. We'll ask for resumes from folks who are part of your project. If you have partners, some letters of commitment. You'll have someone on your project who's a humanities advisor, and they'll write a statement for the application as well. There might be some additional materials you submit. All of those things I've just said will be covered in the application webinar week. So please, if you're interested in this grant and you really want that, more specific deep dive into the application and the support that way, please consider looking out for that webinar week when it comes up. To be eligible for the open track, you can be a nonprofit, government organization, and state or federally recognized tribe that serves Massachusetts residents. And fiscally sponsored projects are also welcome. Again, we do not award funding to individuals. And one note for fiscally sponsored projects, you will need to have a signed fiscal sponsor agreement uploaded to the application. I think we are potentially putting in the chat some information about fiscal sponsorship and how to learn more about that if you're new to it. Again, applicants need to have completed any past Mass Humanities grant project and submitted their final reports 1 week before the application is due. And there are 3 exceptions to the rule. Again, you can have an open Reading Frederick Douglass Together grant. You can be a fiscal sponsor on more than one project at a time, and colleges and universities, different departments can have more than one grant open at a time. Again, if you want to learn more, and particularly because there isn't that letter of inquiry process where we would give you feedback on a letter of inquiry, we can give you feedback via a Zoom conference where we talk through your project, give you information, and look at the eligibility requirements for this process. And you can book an appointment with us via Calendly. You can also, of course, email us at grants@Mass Humanities. And if you want that support on the application, you can join that webinar week. And of course, there is information available on our website as well. All right, so I am happy to stop talking now and turn it over to my colleagues who will be sharing about the Reading Frederick Douglass Together program.
Unfortunately, Toya got kicked off, and so I might actually have to have you keep talking for a bit, Catherine.
I think I've just seen Toya coming back on, so thank you all for bearing with us with some of our Zoom connection issues. So I just let Toya in the room, and hopefully she's able to join us. So
I'm here. I just
great.
need to be
Okay.
pinned. I just need to be pinned. I'm right on time. It just restarted right on time, thankfully.
I think
Okay.
you're ready, Toya.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to tell you 5 things that you need to know about the Reading Frederick Douglass Together grant program. Next slide. So the Reading Frederick Douglass Together Grants program, we support public readings and discussions of in Massachusetts of Frederick Douglass's famous 4th of July address, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." These typically take place between Juneteenth and July 4th. At each event, people take turns reading the speech until it's completed, and that looks different depending on the communities. Sometimes it's intergenerational. Sometimes folks will plan ahead what particular lines that will be read, or sometimes it's really organic and folks just show up and just line up and start reading. Sometimes there's a discussion afterwards. Sometimes the discussion happens throughout the week and they make it a week-long event. Each community considers the meaning of the speech in the past and how it resonates with the present. Next slide. So we did make some changes for 2023. One of the things that we did is we opened our grant line in December so that we could have February readings for Black History Month, as well as to commemorate Frederick Douglass's birthday, February 14th. We've also simplified the application and the budget and the final report process. You just need to, when you complete the budget portion, you don't have to do matching funds anymore. So that was something that we just switched to this year. We will be providing 2 workshops on March 15th and 16th that will support folks who are interested in this particular workshop. And the first one will just be about publicity, reaching out to your legislators, how to get folks involved, how to build a website, social media page, and just how to get the word out to attract participants for your event. The second workshop will focus on event logistics, and that includes, what day of things to think about, plan what things you can use to the funding for in terms of scholars or entertainers for your event, food, beverages. So we talk about all the event logistics, as well as how to really have a trauma-informed event so that the discussion is not only rich, but also in a space that everyone feels safe in. And this year, we also increased our funding from $1,200 to $2,000 for our applicants. Next slide. So our next app, this is a quick view of the application dates. They are posted on our website on our Frederick Douglass page. Our next deadline is March 3rd. And the award date for that is April 14th. So there will be 4 more rounds and opportunities to apply for them for the application process. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. The important thing to think about is that when you do your event, it should be at least 2 to 3 weeks after the award announcement date. And that's just to make sure that you have time to make sure that you're complying with everything that's a part of that grant agreement, and chance to get the word out again about it. It's very important that we get the word out when we have these events so that more people can know about it. Next slide. So who's eligible to apply? If you are a nonprofit organization or have begun the process of filing to become a nonprofit organization, but then also you can also get a fiscal sponsor as well. So what do we require? We require that you have a plan. So in your project description, there is a brief portion where you want to explain what happens for the day. And that just looks different for different folks. Again, I can talk about that further in our next workshop, but sometimes it is a part of a bigger festival or an activity, and it happens there. Sometimes it's a separate event. They're done virtually, they're done in person. Some are actually doing hybrid this year. And then the other thing you want to do is you want to have a budget for how you plan to spend that $2,000. And again, we can talk about that more in the workshop around what that looks like, and give some sample budget prices. So we do have some limits for our budgets. We fund up to $1,000 for the purchase of reusable equipment for the projects. So it's one thing to purchase actual equipment. It's another thing to rent equipment. Receptions, we fund food for up to $300 per project. So depending on where your event is taking place, that's something that maybe need to be a part of the budget, whether it's having refreshments or whether it's having waters because it's outside in July. And then we also provide lodging up to $250 per person per day too. So if, say, you have a guest speaker or a project scholar or someone who's going to be present for the day, we can provide lodging for that. Next slide. So the guidelines are really simple this year because one great thing that I feel I'm proud of that Mass Humanities does is that we really like to hear back from our grantees and learn how we can better support their projects and the work that they're doing in their communities. So you will receive 100% of your award upon submitting your grant contract. And then basically you just need to make sure that you complete the final report so that you can remain eligible for future Frederick Douglass grants as well as for future Mass Humanities funded projects. And the big part, again, is to acknowledge Mass Humanities and the Mass Cultural Council. And the reason why that we make this a part of our guidelines is that we rely on funding in order to fund your programs. And so in order for that to happen, we need to let folks know what's happening out here, what great work that you're doing out here. And then that's pretty much it for the guidelines. Next slide. The other thing that we're doing is we're building capacity and connections. We host monthly gatherings that connect our grantees across the state. So we don't want this just to be a one-time thing for June or July or for February, but we want to really build community. So we are hosting monthly gatherings here at Mass Humanities. They're virtual, and what we hope to do is just keep folks embedded in that Frederick Douglass conversation, keep them connected so that they can share resources so that we can talk about more ways to better our communities. So we just had one in January. We'll be having a few more this year. You can stay up to date if you are signed up for our Mass Humanities newsletters, or you can always send me an email as well. And if you have any questions, I'll check the chat, or you can send me an email. Thank you.
Thank you, Toya. I'm Jen Atwood, Program Officer with Mass Humanities, and I'll be talking through the Staffing Recovery Grant Program. And this quote that you see on the screen came from a survey that we did this past year about how staffing is many humanities organizations' greatest need right now, with the positions in the field needing talented humanities professionals that are struggling with the current labor market as it is. And so I do think that this quote kind of represents a lot of what we're trying to do with the Staffing Recovery Grant Program. You also see the logo for Mass Cultural Council. So one thing to be aware of is that this grant we're able to do thanks to the funding that were received from Mass Cultural Council's Pandemic Recovery Program. Next slide. So a little bit of an overview of what this grant is going to look like. Staffing recovery grants will fund organizations to sustain staffing, to expand the hours of current staff, or to hire new staff with the aim to sustain successful humanities programs for the next 2 years for organizations. So the aim really is to create, bring back programs or grow current humanities programs with new or expanded staff positions. And we're looking at those positions not just being programmatic staff, but could be fundraising staff, could be administrative staff, could be marketing positions. Next slide, please. The full guidelines of this will be available in March, at March 6th to be exact, but I can give you this very brief overview of what this grant is going to look like. The grant fund will be, amounts will be between $14,000 up to $40,000. And the application will open also in March. And there will be a webinar that provides more detail once the full guidelines have been posted, and more details about eligibility requirements. I will touch on a few today. That webinar will be actually April 6th. I don't have the exact date on this slide right here, but definitely you'll get more information soon. The deadline for this grant will be May 1st, and decisions will be made in June. If you have, after hearing my very brief explanation, have more questions about this, feel free to reach out to me at j.atwood@masshumanities.org. Next slide, please. So eligibility, this grant is going to be eligible for 501c3 organizations or fiscally sponsored museums, historical societies, or community cultural organizations with humanities programs or state or federal recognized tribes. You have to have an operation budget that's no larger than $500,000, and we're looking to see what your operations was in your last completed operational year to determine that amount. We also will need 5 or fewer full-time equivalent employees. Again, the full details of eligibility requirements will be available in March, early March. But I do encourage you to look back on our website once those are up. Next slide, please. Specifically, who will not be eligible for this opportunity, because this funding is received through Mass Cultural Council's cultural sector recovery funding. If you or organization received more than $25,000 from that grant, you would not be eligible for this. Or if you received a line item of appropriation from the statute that dictated that grant program, you would not be eligible. However, if you did receive funding from Mass Cultural Council's recovery grant program, but it was less than $25,000, you are eligible for this opportunity. If you received a 2022 staffing grant, your organization, you will not be eligible for this particular opportunity. However, there will be a separate grant process for renewing that grant for a second year. And then finally, if your organization has any open grants that were awarded prior to 2020, those projects will need to be completed, and the final reports for those need to be submitted at least 1 week before completing the application for the staffing recovery grant. And just to also be really clear, if you are planning on applying to both, you can apply for both the Expand Massachusetts Stories opportunity as well as the Humanities Recovery Program. Next slide. So now I'm going to switch gears and show how to actually find the application. And so, Catherine, if you want to stop sharing, and I can share on my screen, just briefly, give me 1 minute. So to access the application, and also find our guidelines, you can go to masshumanities.org. This is the homepage, and then find the grants opportunities. You can click on grants, and if you scroll down, you'll see the different opportunities. Staffing isn't up just yet, but it will be up very soon. And if you want to reach an application or guidelines, you can click on the specific opportunity, and within each page, you can find the guidelines, also translated guidelines. And then to access the grant management system in any of the grant programs, you click here to apply, which will bring you to our grant management system and the various opportunities that are currently open. And if you then you would need to either log on if you already currently have an account, or to create an account if you are new to Mass Humanities. So that's this page. Also, just to note, on the right-hand side here, there's several links to additional tutorials about how to create an account, apply for a grant, and manage your grant dashboard, which I recommend. And if you have any difficulties in terms of completing an application, I encourage you to reach out to the grants@masshumanities.org email, which reaches the entire grants team at Mass Humanities. So if you currently have an account, this is where you would log in. If you're not sure, you can test your email with forgot your password. You'd be able to reset your password that way to log in. I do recommend checking with other people at your organization to see if there is an account that already exists before creating a new one. When you go to create a new one, just be aware that if there's a field with an asterisk sign, those are required fields in order to create an account. And you will need to complete the the organization information, and then project director, who should be the person that would be receiving the notifications about the status of your grant. So just be aware of that when you fill out that information. Also, if you are applying as an individual filmmaker, you would then you would just enter your name and followed by filmmaker for organization. And if you use a fiscal sponsor, you would not put that as your organization here. You would then enter the fiscal sponsor information in the actual application. But again, if you have any other questions about this process, feel free to reach out to the grants team. And I'm going to stop sharing so we can answer some questions. I believe Catherine may have been looking in the chat.
Thanks, Jen. Yes, I was reading the chat a bit, and I can see in the chat that some folks weren't able to hear me very well. So I apologize about that. I hope I'm closer to my mic now, that I can answer some questions. So I saw one question about the Advancing Equity track and selecting up to 15 organizations just for that specific track. And the question was about geographic representation. And I will say that Mass Humanities grants reviews have a wide range of criteria and geographic distribution, making sure that we're funding around the state is always part of the criteria for our grants. I believe there was another question about filmmakers applying for the Advancing Equity track, and they're applying with a fiscal sponsor. And the answer is, if you're a filmmaker and you meet those eligibility requirements, yes, you can apply for the track, and your fiscal sponsor will not be considered the applicant organization. So if your fiscal sponsor is a very, very large organization, like a Center for Independent Documentary, that's not who you would consider the applicant. You consider yourself and your team, and it's in the funding you have as the applicant. So I'm going to keep looking in the chat. I know there were some questions about wanting to confirm that you can apply for both Expand Massachusetts Stories and the Staffing the Recovery grant. So you can apply for both. We always say you simply cannot apply for the same expenses, right? So if you're applying for the Staffing Recovery, you need to be for separate roles, separate expenses from the Expand Massachusetts Stories grant. How many open track grants will be awarded statewide? It will vary depending on the amounts requested by each grantee and the amounts that we have available. Typically, we award around 30, but that can vary. And so I want to say that is a provisional number. It depends on funds available and the total request of applicants. And Jen and Toya, if there are any questions you've seen in the chat that you want to answer, please feel free to jump in.
I'm not sure if you answered this, but someone asked how many open track grants will be awarded statewide.
Yeah, that was the sort of around 30 to 40. That's what we awarded last year. So we're anticipating a similar amount. But again, that can vary depending on the total amounts requested and the total amounts we have available. For anyone who prefers to ask their question with their hand raised and unmute, please feel free to raise your hand if typing in the chat isn't possible for you right now. So like if you're walking and on the phone or driving in your car, if you can indicate that you'd like to unmute, please do that. If you can't indicate, please feel free to unmute, but we'll try to keep the conversation balanced. We may need to mute you if we can't perhaps hear you if there are folks talking over each other.
I did see one question about how you define humanities programs.
That is a great question. And I know Toya gave us some examples in the chat. So I think that's a question that can be really helpful to want to read the full guidelines for, and certainly talk to a program officer about. So I think that it's probably best if we don't try to answer that live in this webinar, but I think looking at the guidelines, I think Toya gave an answer of the kinds of programs that fall into that category. And I think the one thing to think about might be, primarily artistic performance, even though we love the arts, wouldn't count as humanities programs, but things that are discussion-based, conversation-based, sourcing stories, interpreting art, those tend to fall within the realm of the humanities. But I recommend, if you're unsure, to make an appointment with a program officer and have a conversation, or of course send an email, and we'll try to do our best answering over email. Seems like Toya did a great job answering questions in the chat, so maybe I don't have to answer as many right now. So we have a question. In our opinion, what is most needed across the state? I'm not sure I fully understand that question. So I think if that's about what is an unrecognized story for the Expand Massachusetts Stories grant, that's something that you will, you'll provide an answer for in your letter of inquiry or in your application. This is a great question. Can you submit more than one application for an Expand Massachusetts Stories grant per organization? Typically, we only accept one application from an organization for a project. And so what I would recommend is talking to a program officer who might help you be able to decide which is the most appropriate project to submit. I see a hand raised. It looks like that's, I see Jean or Jean Ann. Please feel free to unmute if you can unmute.
Thank you. It's Jane Ann. You may have already answered this, but it is sticking in my mind. So I thought I should ask it. Can you talk about creative work and creative nonfiction and creative work, that's not considered humanities, although I know you're going around. I know that's a complicated question.
Thank you. For Expand Massachusetts Stories grants, creative writing and creative nonfiction for us will fall under that category of the creation of art. I understand that that is a definition that might, that there's a lot of gray area there, but for the purpose of this grant line, those are the definitions. And I'd say so if that's something you're considering applying for, like a personal creative nonfiction project or personal creative writing project, that would not fit within the Expand Massachusetts Stories guidelines. If there's some other categories, if you want a little more feedback on that, that's a great, again, great opportunity to have a conversation with the program officer to learn a little bit more about what you're doing. I hope that answers your question.
Somewhat, but I'll be in touch.
Sure. I see Barbara Lewis. I see a hand up.
Yeah, I have a question. It's not exactly in the same vein as the last one, but it's not entirely different territory. I'm very interested in the story of the 54th and where some of those casualties are buried. For example, my great-great-grandfather is buried in Lenox, and there are 3 other African-American soldiers from the 54th buried there. I'd like to focus on expanding the story of their experience and also their graves, which is at the church on the hill. Their graves are in very serious disrepair. Would I be able to work with an organization in the Berkshires or in Lenox specifically, to get one of their members to apply for that, and then to work with them on whatever they would need from me or want from me in way of information?
Yeah, my recommendation would be to talk with organizations in the Berkshires who might be a potential applicant, who could see that as part of a public program that aligns with their mission. So that would be, I think, a great place to start with a project like that, would be to talk to an organization. And that's certainly a really important story. Yeah, please, feel free to reach out to organizations in the Berkshires who might be applicants for the project.
Okay, and would a library in Lenox, would that be?
Yes, libraries. Libraries are variously nonprofit organizations, sometimes government, municipal organizations. We've definitely funded libraries through the Expand Massachusetts Stories.
Okay, well, thank you.
So, I think that what I'm going to do is just put a little timer on my phone for 2 minutes. And if there aren't any more questions in that 2-minute period, then I think we'll wrap up this webinar. Some folks have asked if we're going to record it. I think we are recording it, and we're posting that on our website along with the slides. So I'm going to start my timer. This will give us all a little bit of a container in which to potentially ask our questions. And then if we don't have any further questions, we'll conclude the webinar.
There is a question in the chat, sorry,
Thanks,
that in terms of the community facilitated discussion for, let's say, a film grant, does that have to be facilitated by a scholar or by the artist filmmaker presenting the film?
It's not required that the scholar facilitate the discussion. Again, that humanities advisor role is one that you, as the project designer, design what that role is going to do and what your project really needs for that role. So it's not required that someone who's the advisor be the facilitator, although that is often a great role for someone who's an advisor.
I will ask one more quick question
Sure.
that is sort of piggybacking on to the scholar and artist question. I've not read the guidelines, so forgive me for that. But if I am a scholar and I am an artist, so can I fulfill both of those, or do I have to have someone outside who is also a scholar? Is that a requirement?
So on a project, the person who has that humanities advisor role can serve multiple roles on a project. They can be a project director. They can also be the humanities advisor. So it's not a standalone role for a project. So that person can serve in multiple roles. But I think it sounds like it would be great for us to have a conversation about your
Okay.
project. And I think I see one other question.
Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome. We have a question about if you don't have a nonprofit, but you want to work on a project. So we don't give funding to individuals. We do give funding to fiscally sponsored projects. So that would require someone working with the fiscal sponsor, defining a project and having them be the organization that can receive the grant funds. And it sounds like this would be another good one for a conversation with one of us. My timer says 3 minutes, so I think that it's probably a good idea for us to wrap up our webinar. It sounds like we'll be having many conversations with many of you over the course of the next few months, and I look forward to those. I look forward to learning about your projects and your ideas, and learning more about the state and our communities through that. So thank you all for coming. Oh,
May I
one more
ask one more question?
Yes, please.
Would you please revisit for us the dates on which all of these different things will be available? So we're
Yeah.
very clear about that.
Great. Let me, I will do one last slide share for everyone, and I'll pull up those particular slides with those dates. Okay, so this will take me a second
Sure.
to get us back to them.
Okay.
So first, I'm going to show us the staffing recovery grant. So this is the grant that Jen spoke about for staffing position at humanities organizations. So full guidelines, all details will be available March 6th. The application will open in March as well, so you'll be able to start filling out information in that application. And the deadline for that application for that grant is May 1st. I'm going to page back now to the Reading Frederick Douglass Together deadlines. So as you can see here, and as Toya explained, this is a monthly rolling deadline, meaning you submit an application on one of these dates, right? And then a few weeks you have, you can be given your award. And so we just have these monthly deadlines when you can apply, and then a few weeks later, write the award date. And that's for the Reading Frederick Douglass Together program. And as Toya highlighted, just making sure that if you want to host an event, that you submit your application such that you'll be given your award not sooner than 2 to 3 weeks before your event. So the good example down here is, if you want to hold an event for Juneteenth and so that would be, happening around June 19th. You would need to submit by May 5th, right? So you receive your award by May 26th, and you have 2 to 3 weeks to prepare for that event with the award. So that's how this rolling application series works. Now I'm going to page us back to the open track deadlines. So this is that open track for Expand Massachusetts Stories grants. This is the, as long as you meet the nonprofit eligibility requirement, you can apply for this grant. So those applications, you'll be able to start filling out the application March 20th, 2023. The application is due May 22nd, and then we'll be announcing those awards in September. And then to bring us back to the beginning, if you want to apply for that advancing equity track, if you think you're potentially eligible for that, the letter of inquiry, that's that shorter project description, that's due March 20th, so a little over a month from now. You'll be notified if you're selected for that track in April. And then if you're part of the track, then these deadlines start to matter to you. We'll have those workshops the week of May 8th. You'll be completing the application in June or July, and you'll be given your award within 3 weeks of submission. So I believe that covers all of the deadlines. And of course, all of the information is available on our website. If you couldn't take it all in here, I know it was a lot. Please feel free to come to the website, get the guidelines, learn about the applications, and always feel free to reach out for more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you all again for coming. We really appreciate your questions, appreciate your time, and look forward very much to learning about your projects and your organizations.
Thank you.